heartwarming and unexpected gesture, Barron Trump shocks Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood by presenting him with a stunning SUV. What starts as a simple moment of gratitude unfolds into an emotional encounter that leaves everyone speechless. Watch as two icons from different generations share a profound connection that will melt your heart. The day began like any other for Clint Eastwood. The 94-year-old Hollywood legend sat in his living room surrounded by awards and memories of a life well lived, but something felt off. A certain emptiness lingered despite the accolades. As he sipped his morning coffee, the sound of the doorbell startled him. When he opened the door, a sharply dressed courier handed him a letter sealed with gold. Clint raised an eyebrow and opened it carefully. Inside was an elegant handwritten note. Dear Mr. Eastwood, you don't know me personally, but your movies have shaped my childhood. In my heart, I'd love to meet you. Please allow me to thank you in person for the lessons your work taught me about strength, integrity, and humanity. Warm regards, Barron. And Trump. Clint was stunned. He recognized the name instantly. Barron Trump, the newly sworn-in president's teenage son, wanted to meet him. Clint had spent decades meeting fans, but this felt different. The thought of a young man raised under such scrutiny admiring his work brought a lump to his throat. Without hesitation, Clint called the number provided, and a calm yet professional voice answered. Mr. Eastwood, said the voice, Barron is honored you've accepted his invitation. The next day, Clint watched from his porch as a convoy of sleek, black SUVs pulled into his driveway. Secret Service agents stepped out first, scanning the area before opening the door for Barron Trump. Dressed sharply in a navy suit, the 18-year-old carried himself with quiet confidence. Clint couldn't help but admire how composed the young man seemed. Mr. Eastwood, Barron said with a warm smile, extending his hand. It's such an honor to meet you, Clint chuckled, shaking his hand. Call me Clint. The honor is mine. You're taller than I expected. Barron laughed, breaking the ice. Instantly, I get that a lot. The two sat down in Clint's cozy living room where posters of the good, the bad, and the ugly and unforgiven hung proudly. Barron's eyes lit up as he took in the room. You know, Barron began, when I was a kid, I used to sneak into the media room just to watch your movies. My parents didn't always approve, but your characters taught me things no classroom ever could. Clint was speechless. It had been years since someone spoke so passionately about his work. As they continued talking, he realized this meeting was about much more than fan admiration. As the conversation deepened, Clint asked the question lingering in his mind. So what made you reach out now? Barron hesitated for a moment before speaking. Growing up in the public eye was tough, but your movies gave me courage. You didn't just play tough guys. You showed how to face challenges with dignity. I wanted to thank you for that. Clint's weathered face softened. He leaned forward, his voice quiet. I never thought my work would mean that much to someone like you. Barron's expression turned serious. It's not just about the movies, Clint. It's about the man behind them. You've lived a life of principle, and that's rare these days. I admire that more than I can say. Clint felt a lump forming in his throat. He wasn't used to receiving such genuine praise, especially from someone so young. Before he could respond, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. This, Barron said, handing it over, is something I've kept for years. It's a list of lessons I learned from your films. I thought it might mean something to you. Clint opened the notebook, his hands trembling as he read the carefully written notes. He felt tears welling up. This young man, with all the world's eyes on him, had taken the time to honor him in a way no one else ever had. Thank you, Clint whispered, his voice cracking. The moment was profound, and little did Clint know Barron's surprises were just beginning. Barron sat in his luxurious suite in the White House, a quiet determination on his face. Despite his fame and privilege, this moment wasn't about wealth or politics. It was personal. He thought back to his childhood watching Clint Eastwood's movies late at night. Those films had been more than entertainment. They were lessons in courage, integrity, and resilience. With Clint's birthday approaching, Barron wanted to do something extraordinary. As Clint's godson, Barron had always looked up to him as a mentor, but he felt it was time to express his gratitude in a way Clint would never forget. After hours of brainstorming, the perfect idea struck him: a custom SUV designed to reflect Clint's rugged, iconic style. Barron picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Get me the best automotive designers. I want this SUV to be unique, something Clint will cherish forever." As the team got to work, Barron oversaw every detail, from the vintage inspired exterior to the personalized leather seats embroidered with Clint's initials. The project had to be perfect. He smiled to himself, imagining Clint's reaction. Little did he know the gesture would touch Clint far deeper than he ever expected. The SUV was ready, gleaming under the bright California sun. Barron had spared no expense, and the result was stunning. It was a blend of modern luxury and rugged charm, a true tribute to Clint's legendary persona. The vehicle was loaded onto a truck ready to be delivered to Clint's home in Carmel by the Sea. Barron, accompanied by his Secret Service detail, boarded a private jet to meet Clint in person. He was nervous but excited. Despite his composed demeanor, Barron couldn't help but feel a little intimidated by Clint's larger-than-life presence. When the convoy arrived at Clint's property, Barron stepped out of the SUV, his heart pounding. Clint was already waiting, his eyes widening as he caught sight of the vehicle. "Barron," Clint said, his voice filled with curiosity. "What's all this?" Barron grinned, motioning toward the SUV. "This is for you, Clint, a small thank you for everything you've taught me." Clint stood, frozen, his eyes scanning the beautiful machine. For a moment he was speechless. Finally he turned to Barron, his voice breaking. "You didn't have to do this, kid." Barron smiled softly. "I wanted to. You've done more for me than you realize." Clint insisted on taking the SUV for a spin. Immediately, as he slid into the driver's seat, his hands ran over the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his initials subtly embossed on the dashboard. The thoughtfulness behind every detail left him overwhelmed. Barron hopped into the passenger seat, eager to see Clint's reaction. As they drove through the winding roads of Carmel, Clint began to open up, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "You know, Barron, I've had a long life, a good one, but gestures like this, they remind me that I've been lucky to meet some truly special people." Barron looked out the window, hiding the emotion welling up in his eyes. "You've been like a second father to me, Clint. Your movies taught me about life, but your kindness taught me about being a good man." Clint pulled the SUV to a stop at a scenic overlook, the ocean stretching out before them. He turned to Barron, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got a good heart, kid. Your parents should be proud." Barron smiled, but tears threatened to spill. In that moment, their bond deepened, bridging the gap between generations and leaving them both profoundly moved. As Clint and Barron gazed out at the vast ocean, the older man's eyes softened. "You know, Barron," Clint began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "this reminds me of a scene from one of my films, the kind of quiet moment where the character realizes what truly matters." Barron smiled, leaning back in his seat. "That's exactly why I loved your movies, Clint. They always made me think about life choices and the kind of person I want to be." Clint nodded, the weight of the conversation settling over him. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, kid. I've met a lot of people in my time, but few as thoughtful as you." Barron chuckled. "Well, I had a great mentor, whether you knew it or not." The words hung in the air, and Clint felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of vulnerability. especially from someone so young, Barron. Admiration was genuine, and it stirred memories Clint hadn't revisited in years. As they drove back, Clint couldn't help but feel that this day was more than just a surprise. It was a moment of connection that would stay with him. Forever back at Clint's home, Barron's security detail discreetly ensured the war area was secure while Clint prepared a simple dinner despite his legendary status. Clint preferred a modest life, and his cozy kitchen reflected that. As they sat down to eat, Barron couldn't help but admire Clint's humility. You know, Clint, I've always wondered how you stayed so grounded after all your success, Clint smirked. Life has a way of humbling you. Kid fame is fleeting, but character, that's what lasts. Barron nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've seen that firsthand growing up in the spotlight. Wasn't easy, but watching your movies taught me to focus on what really matters. The conversation flowed naturally, with Clint sharing stories from his early days in Hollywood and Barron opening up about the pressures of being the president's son. Despite their differences in age and background, they found common ground in their shared values. As the evening wore on, Clint raised his glass of iced tea to unexpected friendships, he said. With a smile, Barron clinked his glass against Clint's and to the mentors to shape us. It was a simple moment, but one filled with profound meaning, a testament to the bond forming between two extraordinary individuals. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Clint and Barron found themselves in the living room, surrounded by the warm glow of a crackling fire. Clint leaned back in his chair, a rare smile playing on his lips. You know, Clint began, I've always wondered if the roles I played made a real difference in people's lives. Hearing you talk about them, it means more than you know. Barron's gaze was steady. They didn't just make a difference, Clint. They shaped who I am. Watching your character's face impossible odds taught me to believe in myself even when the world doubted me. Clint's weathered hands gripped the armrests of his chair as emotion washed over him. You're a good kid, Barron, and you're going to do great things. Barron smiled, his voice soft. I'm just following the example you set. In that quiet moment, both men realized how much they had impacted each other's lives. The SUV, while thoughtful, was merely a symbol of something far greater, the respect and gratitude shared between two generations. As the fire crackled, Clint whispered, this has been one of the best days of my life. Neither of them knew it yet, but the week's events were about to take an even more emotional turn. The morning after their heartfelt conversation, Clint woke up to the sound of the waves crashing outside his home. He stepped out onto the porch, his mind still replaying Barron's words from the night before. As he sipped his coffee, the SUV parked in his driveway caught his eye, a gleaming reminder of the bond they had forged. Barron arrived shortly after his security detail discreetly stationed nearby. Clint greeted him with a warm handshake, pulling him into a brief hug. You've given me more than a car, Barron. Clint said, you've reminded me of what really matters. Barron grinned. You've given me so much through your movies and mentorship. Clint, this is just a small way to say thank you. Clint suggested they take the SUV out for another drive, but this time Barron had a plan. Not yet, Barron said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I've got one more surprise for you. Clint raised an eyebrow, but decided to trust him. As they settled in the living room, Barron pulled out a small worn notebook. This, he said, holding it up, is the journal I kept as a kid while watching your movies, and today I want to share it with you. Barron handed Clint the notebook. Its leather cover were worn from years of use. I started writing in this when I was 9, Barron explained, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Every time I watched one of your movies, I jot down what I learned. Clint opened the journal carefully, his rough hands turning the delicate pages. The first entry was dated years ago, written in a young Barron's handwriting. Watch grand to Reno learned that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. As Clint read on, his eyes began to glisten. Each entry revealed how deeply his work had resonated with Barron. From Unforgiven to Million Duel, Baby Barron had found lessons in courage, resilience, and humanity. I had no idea, Clint murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Barron smiled. Your movies were more than stories to me, they were guides. And when I got to know you in real life, I realized you were everything I'd hoped you'd be. Kind, wise, and humble. Clint closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. You've given me something I'll treasure forever, Barron. Thank you. After an emotional morning, Barron finally convinced Clint to take the SUV for another drive. As they cruised through the quiet streets of Carmel, Barron revealed his next plan. I want to take you somewhere special, he said, a mysterious smile on his face. Clint glanced at him. You've got me curious. Kid. They drove for a while, the SUV gliding smoothly over the winding roads. Finally, they arrived at a small, tucked-away park overlooking the ocean. It was a place Clint hadn't visited in years, one that held memories of his younger days. Barron parked the SUV and gestured for Clint to follow him as they walked toward a bench overlooking the water. Clint realized where they were. This is where I came to think, Clint said quietly, his voice laced with nostalgia. Barron nodded. I thought you'd like to see it again. As they sat together watching the waves crash against the rocks, Clint turned to Barron. You've done more for me in these past few days than I can put into words. Barron smiled, his voice steady. You did the same for me, Clint. I'm just returning the favor. The bond between them had grown into something unbreakable, a testament to the power of gratitude and the unexpected connections that changed lives forever. As Clint and Barron sat at the park overlooking the ocean, Barron's phone buzzed quietly. He glanced at it and smiled. Clint, there's one more part to this surprise, Barron said, his tone playful but mysterious. Clint raised an eyebrow. Kid, you've already outdone yourself. What more could there be? Barron stood, gesturing toward the SUV. Come on, you'll see. They climbed into the vehicle, the security detail following discreetly in their own cars as they drove through the picturesque streets of Carmel. Clint tried to guess where they were going, but Barron kept his lips sealed. Finally, they pulled into a secluded venue with a small crowd waiting inside. Clint froze when he saw the faces, family members, close friends, and even a few of his former co-stars. What is this? Clint asked, his voice wavering. Barron grinned. A celebration of you. Everyone here wanted to thank you for the impact you've had on their lives. Clint's eyes welled up as he stepped out of the car. The gathering wasn't just a party, it was a tribute. For the first time in years, Clint found himself overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding him. Inside the venue, Clint was greeted with hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt words. Each person had a story to share about how Clint had touched their lives. A former stuntman approached him, tears in his eyes. You saved my career when no one else believed in me, he said. An actress Clint had worked with decades ago embraced him tightly. You taught me to believe in myself, Clint. I wouldn't be where I am without you. Barron watched from the side, his heart full as he saw Clint's impact come to life. It was a reminder of why he had planned this surprise in the first place, to honor the man who had unknowingly shaped him and so many others. As the night went on, Clint listened to story after story, each one a testament to his character and kindness. For a man who had spent much of his life in the spotlight, this was different. It wasn't about fame or accolades, it was about connection and legacy. When Barron finally approached Clint, the older man's voice broke. You didn't just give me a gift, Barron, you gave me a chance to see what my life has meant to Eastwood has been more than a legend to me. He's been a mentor, a role model, and a friend. Tonight is about showing him the gratitude he deserves. The room erupted in applause, and Clint stood to hug. Barron, you've got a good heart, kid, Clint said, his voice thick with emotion as the guests began to leave. Clint and Barron sat outside under the stars. Clint looked at the SUV parked nearby and then at Barron. You didn't have to do any of this, Clint said softly. Barron shook his head. I did, because you showed me through your work and your life that gratitude is everything, and I'll never forget what you've done for me in that quiet moment. The bond between them felt unbreakable. It wasn't about the SUV or the party, it was about the connection between two souls who had found in each other a source of inspiration and strength. Little did they know the week wasn't over yet, and the most emotional moment was still to come. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over Clint's home. Barron arrived early, the SUV parked outside, gleaming. Under the light, he carried a small, carefully wrapped box. Clint greeted him at the door, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Barron, you've already done more than enough, Clint said with a chuckle. Glancing at the SUV, Barron smiled. This is the last part, I promise, but it's important inside. Barron handed Clint the box. This is something I've been holding onto for years. I think you should have it now. Clint opened the box slowly, revealing a faded movie poster from one of his most iconic films. It was signed by Clint himself years ago. I got this when I was a kid, Barron explained. It had hung in my room for years. Every time I looked at it, it reminded me to be brave, to dream big, and to stay true to myself. You gave me that. Clint's hands trembled as he held the poster. He looked up at Barron, his eyes glassy. You're one hell of a young man. Barron, thank you, Clint suggested they take the SUV for a drive. Barron agreed, sliding into the passenger seat as Clint took the wheel. The streets of Carmel seemed quieter that morning, as if the world was pausing to let them have this moment. As they drove, Clint shared stories from his youth, tales of perseverance, lessons learned the hard way, and the moments that defined him. Barron listened intently, absorbing every word. You know, Barron, Clint said, his voice steady but thoughtful. It's not about the car or the party. It's about what you've shown me this week, that my life has mattered not just to audiences, but to real people. Barron nodded. You've done more than you realize, Clint. This is just my way of saying thank you. The drive ended at a scenic overlook. They stepped out of the car, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The moment was serene, almost sacred. Clint turned to Barron, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're going to do great things, kid, and I'll be here watching every step of the way. The week had come to an end, but the impact of those days would last a lifetime. Clint and Barron shared one final meal together, surrounded by Clint's family and close friends. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, love, and a deep sense of connection. As the evening wound down, Clint raised his glass to Barron, a young man with a heart bigger than any gesture. You've reminded me what life is really about: gratitude,